Hi everyone and welcome again to yet another episode with author Rajesh Talwar. Today we are going to discuss his new book, The Boy Who Wrote Our Constitution. So Rajesh, my first question to you is that this is a fact-based book, right? So where did you get all the information from?
It's an interesting cover because you see the artist has taken the colors of the flag, and of course this is Ambedkar. And to answer your question, yes, it's a fact-based drama, and I have written historical plays before. For example, I wrote one on Ambedkar not on Ambedkar, on Aurangzeb not so long ago. And for that also I went to the original source. It's always better to go to the original source than to second-party accounts. So in this case, I went to Ambedkar's own autobiography. He didn't write anything lengthy like Gandhi did, but he wrote a short autobiography called Waiting for a Visa. And many of the things which are there in this play have been taken from that book by him. And also I've taken in material from his authorized biography and writings on him. So I've tried to make it as authentic as possible. So there are lots of dialogues, for example, within the script, which are his real dialogues. So I've had to take a degree of artistic license in presenting it because this is a children's play and it should be interesting, it should be lively. So that degree of artistic liberty I have taken, but otherwise it's as authentic as it can get.
Okay, Rajesh. So my next question to you is, why did you choose Ambedkar rather than other nationalists, like Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose? So why specifically Ambedkar?
That's a beautiful question. And in fact, in the play itself, in the very first scene, the children have to enact the play and they've been assigned by this teachers that do it on somebody who can be a role model. And the play should also be interesting. And then Milan, one of the kids, he says, let's go for Ambedkar because his childhood is much more interesting because it's much more challenging. He faces much greater hardships as a child. I mean, Gandhi, for example, you could say that he had an issue with non-vegetarian food. Some Muslim boy in school told him that Hindus and Indians are weak because they don't eat non-vegetarian food. So Gandhi, as a child, he ate non-vegetarian food and then he stopped eating it. That's not a very interesting thing to build an entire play on. If it was possible to make a play on Gandhi's childhood, there would have already been a play. And maybe it would be titled The Boy Who Became a Mahatma. And similarly, for Nehru also, his childhood is not particularly interesting. Bose's childhood is interesting because he goes somewhere to help in a cholera district, and another time he goes off in a spiritual quest. But I think the most challenging childhood that anyone faced amongst all our national leaders, that was Ambedkar. He had huge difficulties even as a child.
Okay, Rajesh. So you have now established that there were a lot of difficulties. So could you tell us what those difficulties were?
For example, young Bhim, when he's in school, he's not allowed to drink water directly. There's a tap in the school, but he cannot go and open the tap because he will pollute the tap. And then high caste children cannot use that tap. So the only way for him to drink water is for a peon to open the tap and him to place his mouth below. If the peon is not there, then he cannot drink water, something we take for granted. So in his autobiography, he writes that that particular episode can be summed up in 4 words: no peon, no water. And sometimes the peon is sent off somewhere else, so that means he just cannot drink water. Food, of course, he cannot get food. That is just one difficulty. There's a very moving episode where Ambedkar goes to meet his father together with his siblings. and they reach Masood railway station. And from there, they have to take a tanga to his father's house because the communication they sent to the father was not received in time. But the tanga driver refuses to take them because he says that you are untouchable. How can I take? They have the money. The tanga wala also needs the money. But he says, no, you're untouchable. I cannot take you. So finally, the solution they find is that the children drive the tanga and the tanga wala runs in front of the tanga. Can you imagine? So these are, really terrible experiences which Ambedkar had even as a child. You cannot compare it with the difficulties faced by any other national leader. And I think they actually formed his determination to try and do something to change the state of affairs.
Okay, Rajesh. So, the next question that I have is, you told us about all these difficulties, but how did Ambedkar go to Columbia University and London School of Economics when there were such monetary issues?
Thanks, Ananya. In fact, recently, Arvind Kejriwal, he announced that he can't imagine how Ambedkar would have filled up the forms, how he found out about Columbia University. So I think Mr. Kejriwal may not be familiar with the story, actually. The story is that Ambedkar was studying at Elphinstone College in Mumbai, where one of the teachers there, he saw this guy so bright, and he didn't even have money for his school fees. So he went and approached, the teacher went and approached the Maharaja of Baroda, who was a forward-looking Maharaja. And he went with Ambedkar. And the Maharaja had given a speech in which he said he wants to promote education for Dalits. So the teacher said, do you mean what you said? Because I have one of the brightest Dalits you could possibly find. So the Maharaja said, yes, I mean it absolutely, but I need to talk to the boy myself. I will not accept your word that he is such a bright kid. So then there is a conversation that the Maharaja has with him, in which the Maharaja is also astounded by his brilliance. So the Maharaja then supports him for his schooling. And then later, it is because of the Maharaja that he's able to go to Columbia University, a scholarship granted by the Maharaja of Baroda, and then later to the London School of Economics. So he actually ends up, I think, being the first PhD from LSE, the first Indian PhD from LSE, and then he comes back.
Okay, Rajesh. So when Ambedkar comes back to India, are the problems that he faced before, leaving for abroad for his studies over? Because when he came back, he was so qualified.
He's still a Dalit in the eyes of the people here. So there are scenes in the play which show this based on Ambedkar's own recollections. So he goes to stay at a Parsi lodge, and the Parsis come in the evening after a couple of days and they say, we found out you are staying here and you are a Dalit. You have to leave immediately. You have polluted the guest house. Then he requests a Hindu friend. Can I stay at your house for a few days? He says, I don't have a problem, but my cook is a Saraswat Brahmin and he will have a problem. So he said, no problem. I will not stay with you. I will go to stay with a Christian friend. So he then goes to a Christian friend's house. And the Christian friend says, I'm very progressive and I would love to keep you in the house. But unfortunately, my wife, she comes from a Brahmin Hindu family before they converted to Christianity. And they still have those Brahmin prejudices. So I will have to convince her. So Ambedkar says, no, thank you very much. I will find some other solution. So Ambedkar writes, he says, in this country, everybody who is not a Dalit, I couldn't stay at a Hindu friend's house because I'm a Dalit. I couldn't stay at a Christian friend's house because I'm a Dalit. When I went to the Daulatabad fort with some Dalit colleagues, the Muslims of the area came carrying lathis that you Dheds, you have polluted the water tank. So Muslims are also prejudiced against Dalits. And he says, now I find that the Parsis who have nothing to do with the Indian religious system. They are also prejudiced against Dalits. So there is not a single community in the country that is not prejudiced against Dalits. And he says, what a state of affairs. I must change this.
All right, Rajesh. So that is a really sad state of affairs. But why did Ambedkar, come back to India? Because he studied in some of the prestigious universities. He could have easily lived abroad as well.
Ambedkar's friends asked him the same question. He said, why you come here to work for this Maharaja of Baroda? And Ambedkar says, he was the one who gave me the scholarship. And we had an agreement that I will work for the state of Baroda when I finish my studies. He said, but who cares for these agreements? He said, no, I have to honor my agreement. So he came back to honor his agreement. But these were the difficulties he faced. He couldn't even find a place to stay.
Okay, Rajesh. So can you mention some major struggles that Ambedkar launched on behalf of his people?
There are two most prominent such agitations. One is that Ambedkar burns the Manusmriti at a public gathering of Dalits. Because the Manusmriti is an ancient text which preaches discrimination against Dalits. So as a child in the play, it is shown that Ambedkar asks one of his teachers, he says, what shall we do? Why are we discriminated against? What can we do? Why are we discriminated against? And the teacher says, there are some ancient writings which are very foolish and evil, and they need to be destroyed. And you need to create a new document. So this is where the Constitution comes in, that a new document which overrides all those superstitions of the past. So there are two aspects of Ambedkar's struggle, really. One is to get rid of those ancient evil writings. And although Hinduism is a blessed religion, a great religion, but there are some evil and nasty writings within, and the Manusmriti is one of them. So Ambedkar has a gathering in which he publicly destroys the Manusmriti. That's a very seminal event, one which Dalits celebrate. And the second seminal event is the march to the Chowdar Lake. So there is this lake, the Chowdar Lake, where everybody can drink water from, but the Dalits are not allowed. So everybody knows that in 1930, Mahatma Gandhi launched the Gandhi March against the salt tax, which was imposed by the British. And that was a wonderful agitation. The world knows about it. But the world and very few Indians also know that actually 3 years previously, there was another Satyagraha, Mahat Satyagraha, which was launched by Ambedkar, where Ambedkar took thousands of Dalits to the Chowdar Lake. That today we shall have a break with tradition. We are going to drink this water. So Gandhi goes to the sea and he takes some water and he makes salt. And Ambedkar goes 3 years previously with thousands of Dalits and they just drink water from the lake. Of course, this outrages the high castes in that area. And there is a lot of antagonism. But the Mahat Satyagraha is another seminal event which Dalits are aware of now, but normal Indians are not aware of. Many of us are not aware of. And I think, this is the reason why, part of the reason the play was written, so that more awareness percolates to children. At a young age, they understand that we are all Indians. We should not fight over things like caste. And in the play, there is a Christian boy, there's a Hindu boy, there's a Muslim boy, and there are two girls also. And each of them thinks that, we don't discriminate. And then they slowly start to realize that actually, it's a very serious problem. So it becomes a kind of learning process for the children themselves. I have to say that I have been astounded by the public reaction to this publication because there have been reactions from the Telugu community, from the Hindi heartland. The play has found coverage in Telugu newspapers, in Navbharat Times, apart from having a media splash in the mainstream media. So I think it struck a chord, and I hope that it will very soon have a translation into Hindi and other Indian languages, because the issue runs deep, and we really don't have meaningful plays for middle grade children. If you see the United States, they also had their civil rights issue, but there were plays which were staged against discrimination against African Americans. There were children who, including white children, who went for marches as part of the civil rights movement. So there's no reason that we should just give homilies and platitudes to our children and not make them aware that, there are still evils which persist in our society, and we should try and get rid of them.
So Rajesh, this was such an enlightening session, and I'm pretty sure that whoever reads this book is going to, understand a lot about these issues and learn a lot from them too. So I just want to thank you for sharing all this with us and for even writing this book so that our generation and the generations to come can understand what all our leaders went through and how these changes came about. So once again, thank you, Rajesh.
This issue continues to persist. Every month we hear of some Dalit girl being raped in a northern state. We hear of them being persecuted in villages. There are still water sources which they cannot access. There's still, there's lots of India which needs to change. So hopefully this is a small step in the right direction. But it's lovely to be with you, Ananya. And thank you so much. See you again soon.